The sweat wasn't from the Baghdad heat, and the heat was a living thing. It was a dry, oppressive force that baked the very air you breathed into a palpable entity, a physical weight that pressed down from a bleached white, featureless sky. It smelled of millennia of dust, of ancient, sun-cracked stone, and the faint, ever-present tang of unburnt diesel fuel from 1,000 groaning generators. This sweat was different. It was a cold, chemical sheen that slicked my palms and left the coppery taste of adrenaline sharp and metallic in the back of my throat. It was the sweat of a lie, a vast and intricate one, threatening to collapse under its own weight and crush us all beneath the rubble. The high-pitched shriek of the alarm was an electronic scalpel, methodically slicing through the thick, stale air of the Iraqi Ministry of Industry and Minerals. It wasn't just a noise. It was a weaponized sound. An acoustic assault engineered in some sterile laboratory in Langley or Fort Meade. Its frequency, a piercing 2,500 hertz sine wave pulsed at a frantic 3 beats per second, was specifically chosen to bypass cognitive thought and resonate with the most primal, reptilian parts of the human brain. It was a sound designed to induce panic, to shatter composure and force mistakes. It was working perfectly on the junior minister, a man named Fadil, whose face had gone the sallow, waxy color of old parchment. He was muttering panicked prayers under his breath, his eyes darting towards the exits like a cornered animal. It was also, despite 15 years of training designed to wall off such weaknesses, working on Finn. I could see the tremor in his hand as he held the Bruker Alpha P portable spectroscope. Its germanium crystal lens mere centimeters from a canister of what was supposed to be a precursor chemical for infant formula. His knuckles were bone white, a stark contrast to the dark gray, textured polymer of the device. Finian O'Connell, 26 years old, a prodigy fast-tracked from MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, with a mind that could cut diamond and, at this particular moment, nerves like spun glass. This was his first field deployment, his first time truly outside the wire, and the 1,000-yard stare in his eyes told me he was imagining a dark, windowless room and a man with a rusty pair of pliers. He looked like he was about to vomit his government-issue breakfast of reconstituted eggs and stale coffee onto the polished, oil-stained concrete floor. "It's a mistake," Arthur Vance said, his voice a perfect symphony of condescending British bureaucracy. Each syllable dripped with the weary patience of a man perpetually forced to deal with the incompetence of lesser beings, a tone he had perfected over 3 decades of service to the Crown. He made a small, deliberate show of adjusting his pale blue United Nations flak jacket over a crisp, sweat-stained Charvet shirt, the movement a piece of carefully rehearsed theater for our audience. "My dear Colonel, your men are simply overzealous. This facility was declared clean, as you well know, on our last inspection 3 months ago. The paperwork, I assure you, is quite clear on the matter." Colonel Tariq al-Jamil of the Mukhabarat, Saddam's ever-present and ever-watchful secret police, did not reply. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, a slight, almost amused smile playing on his thin lips. He was our official minder, our shepherd, and our jailer. A man who moved with the languid, terrifying grace of a stalking panther. His suit was a dark, immaculate Italian wool, an absurd choice for the 110-degree heat. Yet on him it looked less like clothing and more like a uniform of absolute authority. He smelled faintly of starch and a rich, dark, sobrany black Russian tobacco. His eyes, the color of polished mahogany, were not on the panicked minister or the pontificating Vance. They were on me, always on me. He knew. He didn't know what precisely. But his instincts, honed in the torture chambers of Abu Ghraib and the back alleys of Beirut, told him that I was the fulcrum on which this entire charade balanced. My name was Leo Kane, and my official title on the UNESCOM roster was Logistics and Security Coordinator. It was a title as hollow as the canisters we were pretending to inspect. In reality, I was the ghost, the man who moved in the shadows of the operation, the one who did the things that could never be written down in any after-action report. While Vance wove webs of bureaucratic nonsense and Finn handled the delicate technology, I was the one who watched the guard's hands, who listened for the click of a safety being disengaged, who carried a SIG Sauer P226 in the small of my back, its 14 rounds of 9mm parabellum hollow-point ammunition, a final, brutal argument. I was the contingency plan, the human circuit breaker. The alarm kept screaming, a relentless, pulsating shriek that vibrated in my teeth and rattled my skull. Everything in this godforsaken country was a test, a probe, a feint designed to peel back a layer of your composure. Tariq was watching my reaction, my posture, the microscopic flicker of my gaze towards the heavy, rust-streaked steel door at the far end of the warehouse. He was looking for the tell, the crack in the carefully constructed facade of a bored American bureaucrat. I gave him nothing. I slowed my breathing, consciously relaxing the muscles in my shoulders. I met his gaze and held it, my expression one of mild, professional annoyance, the look of a man whose lunch was being inconveniently delayed by local incompetence. Inside my chest, my heart was hammering a frantic, syncopated rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat for the damned. Because 36 feet away, down a dusty corridor and inside a locked communications closet, was the real reason we were here. It was a device no larger than a domino, a masterpiece of microengineering from the wizards at Langley's Office of Technical Service, a parasitic listening post codenamed the Moth. And if that alarm was real, if this wasn't one of Tariq's elaborate psychodramas, then we had just committed an act of espionage so blatant it would be tantamount to a declaration of war. The silence, when it finally came, was more jarring than the noise. It crashed down like a physical weight, leaving a high-pitched ringing in our ears and a vacuum that sucked all the air from the cavernous room. A soldier in a faded Republican Guard uniform, a cheap Chinese Type 56 Kalashnikov clone slung over his shoulder, spoke rapidly to Tariq in Arabic, his voice low and urgent. Tariq nodded, the ghost of a smile never leaving his face. He turned back to Vance, the picture of magnanimous apology. "A faulty sensor," he announced, his English precise and clipped, the product of a long-ago education at Sandhurst. "My apologies for the excitement. It appears a rat may have chewed through a wire. We have a terrible problem with them here." His eyes, cold and unnervingly intelligent, flicked back to me for a fraction of a second. Rats. They get into everything. So very difficult to eradicate. The message was crystal clear. Vance huffed, a masterful performance of indignation. "Well, I should hope so. This sort of interruption is completely unacceptable. It calls into question the entire chain of custody for this site." He was good, the best I'd ever worked with. A former MI6 station chief in Beirut, Vance could project an aura of bumbling, rule-obsessed officialdom that was more effective than any cloaking device. While he tied the Iraqis in procedural knots and feigned outrage over non-existent protocols, Finn and I did the real work. We packed our gear, the movements slow, deliberate, rehearsed 100 times in a full-scale mock-up back in a windowless warehouse in Virginia. Every piece of equipment had two functions. The spectroscope Finn used was real, but its handle contained a high-gain directional microphone capable of picking up a whisper from 50 feet. The air sampler, a bulky box with a wheezing fan, was a passive RF detector, sweeping a spectrum from 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz, sniffing for hostile surveillance sweeps or active transmissions. My own digital camera, an early model Olympus C2 500L, I used for documenting potential violations, was a thermal imager. Its lens capable of seeing the faint heat signatures of active electronics through 30 centimeters of concrete. We were a symphony of deception, and I was the conductor, ensuring every instrument played its part in perfect, deadly harmony. Back in the white UN Land Cruiser, the air conditioning blasting Arctic air that did little to cool the fire in my nerves, Finn finally broke. The vehicle smelled of hot vinyl, dust, and our collective, curdling fear. God, Leo. I thought that was it. I thought they had us. His voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the rattling of the chassis on the potholed, sun-cracked road. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, leaving red marks on the bridge of his nose. "They're always testing us, Finn," I said, not taking my eyes off the drab, sun-bleached buildings of Baghdad sliding past the armored window. I watched the faces of the people on the street, resigned, weary, suspicious. Every face was a potential threat, every glance a question. Tariq lives for these little games. He wants to see who flinches. "Did you flinch?" he asked, his voice still trembling. "I don't know how," I lied. I flinched on the inside, where no one could see. I had been flinching for 15 years, ever since a car bomb in Beirut had taught me in a searing flash of heat and shrapnel that the world was not a stable place. My right leg still ached with a deep, grinding pain when the air was damp, a permanent souvenir from that lesson in physics and fanaticism. The lie was a part of the armor. You never let them see you bleed, not even your own side. This wasn't about weapons of mass destruction. Not really. Everyone on the inside knew Saddam was playing a shell game, moving precursor chemicals and centrifuge parts around the country in the back of chicken trucks and ambulances, always one step ahead of the inspectors. The real mission, the one sanctioned by a secret presidential finding and run out of a windowless sub-basement at Langley, was codenamed Operation Midas. The goal wasn't just to find the gold, it was to map the entire palace vault. We weren't just looking for WMDs. We were installing a nervous system. We were bugging the entire Iraqi government, from Saddam's inner circle down to the regional Ba'ath party offices. The moths we planted were not simple microphones. They were sophisticated SIGINT repeaters, marvels of covert technology. Each one was designed to intercept everything. Landline calls, microwave transmissions from rooftop antennas, encrypted military radio traffic on the 30 to 88 megahertz band, even the faint Van Eck freaking emissions from computer monitors. They were parasitic, drawing infinitesimally small amounts of power from the very electrical systems they were embedded in. And they transmitted their take in encrypted, millisecond bursts to a constellation of keyhole satellites passing silently overhead. When we were done, the CIA would have a clearer picture of Saddam's inner circle than he did himself. The Canal Hotel, a former five-star tourist trap that had seen better decades, served as the UN headquarters. It was a bizarre island of international neutrality in a sea of paranoia. Journalists with thirsty eyes, jaded aid workers, and spies from a dozen different countries mingled in the dusty lobby, drinking warm Amstel beer and trading rumors like currency. Our sanctuary was a suite on the top floor, retrofitted and designated OSCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. The room was swept for bugs twice a day by our own four-man technical team. The windows were coated with a metallic film to block laser microphones, and a white noise generator hummed constantly, filling the space with a sound like a ceaseless, gentle waterfall. This was where we planned our incursions, our only truly safe space in a country that was one giant, hostile listening device. Tonight's target was the Ministry of Defense. It was a much harder target than the glorified warehouse we'd hit today. The blueprints, acquired at great expense from a disgruntled Iraqi engineer who had defected to Jordan, were spread across a portable light table, their brittle, yellowed paper glowing under the harsh fluorescent light. "The primary target is here," I said, pointing with the tip of a sealed pen at a nexus of lines on the schematic. "Main communications conduit for the General's staff. It runs vertically through the building in this service shaft, from the basement switching station to the rooftop antenna array." Finn leaned in, his glasses slipping down his nose. He smelled faintly of antiseptic soap and anxiety. "The shaft is concrete-lined, steel-reinforced. We'll need the Serpent." The Serpent was Finn's baby. It was a fiber-optic borescope, no thicker than a strand of spaghetti, but with a steerable, diamond-tipped head containing a microscopic CMOS camera. It was our eyes and ears inside the walls. The drill we used was a marvel of German engineering, a Hilti TE-7C modified by the wizards in OTS. It was battery-powered, nearly silent, and used a counter-rotating magnetic bit that turned concrete and steel into fine, easily managed dust, which was simultaneously vacuumed through a double HEPA filter into a sealed canister. No noise, no mess, no evidence. Vance was studying a different document, a schedule of the ministry's senior staff meetings, provided by a well-placed source in the Jordanian GID. "General Hamadi has a standing meeting at 1000 hours every Tuesday. It lasts precisely 90 minutes. He's a creature of habit. That's our window. I'll create a diversion on the 3rd floor, a dispute over chemical import declarations for their air defense batteries. It's complex, boring, and just plausible enough. It should pull the senior minders, including our friend Tariq, away from the ground floor for at least an hour." "And if it doesn't?" Finn asked, his voice tight. "Then Leo deals with it," Vance said simply, without looking up from his papers. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. That was my job. Dealing with it. I was the human variable. While Vance played the bumbling aristocrat and Finn played the nervous scientist, I was the shadow that moved between them. I carried the tools, watched the guards, listened to the cadence of footsteps in the hall, ready to create a distraction of my own. A short circuit, a faked medical emergency, a sudden, violent argument with a local official, whatever it took to buy Finn the seconds he needed. Later that night, alone in my small, sterile room, I field-stripped my P226. The familiar, precise clicks of the slide, barrel, and recoil spring coming apart and reassembling were a form of meditation, a ritual of control in a world of chaos. The cold, hard reassurance of the weapon was a constant reminder that I was the final solution to any problem that couldn't be solved with lies or misdirection. The next morning, the heat was already a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering the city before the sun had fully risen. The air tasted of dust, low-grade diesel fuel, and desperation. Our convoy of 3 white Land Cruisers rolled up to the Ministry of Defense, a monolithic block of concrete and smoked glass that radiated brutalist authority. Tariq was waiting for us on the steps, smoking a thin, dark Sobrania Black Russian, its gold filter a glint of decadent authority. The smoke, smelling of rich Turkish tobacco, curled around his head like a malevolent halo. He greeted Vance with a formal nod, but his eyes, as they had the day before, found mine. There was a new flicker of interest in them, a sharpening of his focus. He knew yesterday's alarm wasn't a rat. He just couldn't prove it. A busy day for you, Mr. Vance, Tariq said, his voice smooth as silk. So much to inspect. One wonders if you ever sleep. The cause of peace is a tireless one, Colonel, Vance replied smoothly, hoisting his briefcase. Shall we? The first hour was a carefully choreographed waste of time. We inspected a storage room filled with gas masks from the Iran-Iraq war, their rubber perishing in the dry heat, the smell of decaying polymers thick in the air. We tested the air in a laboratory that hadn't been used in a decade, its benches coated in a fine layer of ochre dust. All the while, I was mapping the building in my head, counting paces, noting the positions of the guards, the location of the security cameras, most of which were old, fixed-position Panasonic models with predictable blind spots. I felt the low hum of the building's power systems through the soles of my boots, a constant thrum of energy that our moths would soon be feeding on. At 9:58, Vance made his move. He discovered a discrepancy in a shipping manifest for replacement parts for a Roland missile system. His voice, trained in the debating halls of Cambridge, rose, echoing in the marble-floored hallway. The local ministry official sputtered, his face flushing with a mixture of fear and outrage. Tariq's posture stiffened. The game was afoot. I must insist on seeing the original documentation immediately, Vance declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. This is a potential violation of UN Security Council Resolution 687, paragraph 12. I will not have my team's time wasted with fraudulent paperwork. Tariq was forced to intervene, his amusement replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He escorted a fuming Vance and the hapless official towards the records office on the 3rd floor. He shot one last look over his shoulder, a look that said, I will be back. He left 2 of his junior Mukhabarat agents with us. They were young, their uniforms crisp, but their eyes were lazy and bored. That was my cue. Finn, I said, my voice low and calm. I need to check the atmospheric pressure readings on the ground floor. Standard procedure for sensor calibration. One of the agents stepped forward, his hand resting near his holstered Tariq 9mm pistol, a cheap local copy of the Beretta M 1951. Now this is not on the inspection plan. The plan is a guideline, I said, fixing him with a flat, bored stare that I had perfected over years. External barometric pressure can affect the calibration of the chemical sniffers. It's in the UNESCOM Operational Annex, Section 4, Subparagraph B. Do you want to be the one to explain to Colonel Al-Jamil why our readings for the entire day were invalid, because you wouldn't let me take a 5-minute reading? He hesitated, cowed by the mention of a non-existent bureaucratic rule. I didn't wait for an answer. I picked up a small, heavy Pelican case and walked towards the corridor that led to our target. Finn followed, his face pale, pushing a trolley with the larger pieces of equipment. The second agent trailed us, but at a distance. He was more interested in lighting a cigarette than in watching 2 UN paper pushers. The communications closet was exactly where the blueprint said it would be. The lock was a joke. A simple wafer tumbler that I opened in less than 10 seconds with a tension wrench and a half-diamond pick. The faint clicks of the wafers aligning audible only to me. The agent behind us didn't even notice. Inside, the closet was hot and cramped, filled with the smell of hot plastic and ozone. Thick bundles of cables, a rainbow of colors, snaked up the walls and disappeared into the ceiling. This was the building's central nervous system. He's right outside, Finn whispered, his hands shaking as he unpacked the drill. Forget him, I said, my voice a low growl. I pulled a device from my pocket that looked like a television remote and pointed it at the hallway. He won't be a problem. The device was a short-range microwave emitter. The agent's cheap walkie-talkie would now be filled with impenetrable static. And if he had a cell phone, it would have no signal. We were in a small bubble of electronic silence. I closed the closet door, leaving it open just a crack, a sliver of light, our only connection to the outside world. "Wall density?" I asked. Finn pressed a small acoustic sensor against the concrete. A reading appeared on its tiny LCD screen. 30 centimeters, rebar at 10 and 22. Standard, give me the drill. The Hilti whirred to life, with a sound no louder than an electric toothbrush. I pressed the magnetic bit against the wall, and it bit into the concrete. A thin stream of gray dust sucked instantly into the attached vacuum hose. This was the longest, most vulnerable part of the process. For 10 minutes that stretched into an eternity, the only sounds were the soft whir of the drill and Finn's ragged breathing. I kept my eye on the crack in the door. Watching the indifferent agent smoke his cigarette, my body coiled like a spring, every muscle screaming with tension. The drill bit punched through the final layer of concrete with a soft thud. I withdrew it and handed the serpent to Finn. He fed the tiny fiber optic cable into the hole. On a small, handheld screen, we saw the inside of the service shaft. It was a dark, dusty space, thick with the arteries of the ministry. "There," Finn breathed, manipulating a tiny joystick. The view on the screen shifted, zooming in on a thick black cable, the primary data trunk. "That's it. That's the one." Now for the delicate part. Attached to the end of a long, articulated probe was the moth. It was disguised as a standard line-tap diagnostic tool, a small gray box with a legitimate-looking serial number stamped on its side. If anyone ever found it, they'd assume it was a piece of forgotten telephone equipment. Finn's job was to guide the probe through the small hole, open the clamp on its end, and attach the moth to the data trunk. The clamp contained 2 microscopic induction needles that would pierce the cable's sheath, drawing power and siphoning data without interrupting the signal. He guided it in, his movements slow and precise, his earlier panic replaced by focused concentration. The view on the screen was our only guide. The probe was inches away from the cable, and then we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps coming down the hall at a brisk pace. "Tariq," I hissed. My blood went cold. Vance's 90-minute window had just shrunk to 20. "I'm not on yet," Finn stammered, his hands slick with sweat again. The probe wobbled dangerously on the screen. "Get on it," I ordered, my voice dangerously quiet. I moved to the door, my hand on the handle. The agent outside flicked his cigarette away and straightened up as Tariq rounded the corner. "Where are the others?" Tariq's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hallway. "The American," the agent said, gesturing vaguely with his head towards our closet. He said something about barometers. I could hear the profound suspicion in Tariq's silence. He took a step towards our closet. I had a fraction of a second to make a decision. I couldn't let him open that door. I kicked the base of the trolley hard, aiming for the metal leg. A heavy case of calibration weights, actually solid blocks of lead, crashed to the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot in the enclosed space. "Shit!" I yelled, clutching my foot and hopping out of the doorway into the hallway, directly into Tariq's path. "Damn it, I think it's broken." I contorted my face in a mask of agony. It wasn't entirely an act. The surge of adrenaline and fear was real enough to make me feel sick. Tariq stopped, his eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from the case on the floor to my face. He was trying to decide if this was genuine or a performance. The 2 junior agents stared, unsure of what to do. "My foot? I think my foot is broken," I gasped, leaning heavily against the wall, putting all my weight on my good leg. It was a risky, theatrical move, but it was all I had. It changed the dynamic, made me the center of a potential diplomatic incident. An injured UN inspector was a headache Tariq did not need. Behind me, in the closet, I heard a faint, satisfying click as the moth's clamp locked onto the cable. Finn had done it. Tariq's eyes bored into me. He knew. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the faint flare of his nostrils. He knew he'd been played, but the scene was too perfect, too sudden for him to call me on it without any evidence. He was trapped by the rules of his own game. "Get a medic," he finally barked at one of the agents, his voice tight with controlled fury. He looked at me, his face an unreadable mask of cold courtesy. "It seems, Mr. Kane, that you are a very clumsy man." "Comes with the job, Colonel," I grunted, forcing a pained smile. "Occupational hazard." We planted 4 more moths over the next 3 weeks. Each time the risks grew. Tariq's surveillance became suffocating. He separated me from Finn whenever he could, assigning extra minders to watch our every move. He had our rooms at the Canal Hotel searched, discreetly of course. We knew because one of our own surveillance devices, a tiny acoustic sensor hidden in a lampshade, recorded them. The cat-and-mouse game escalated. We communicated in code, using pre-arranged signals. Tapping a pen twice on a clipboard meant the target was clear. Adjusting a tie meant abort. Our final target was the prize, the Taji Republican Guard command bunker north of Baghdad. This was Saddam's primary military command and control center, the nerve center of his entire war machine. The intelligence from this location would be pure gold. But the place was a fortress. The blueprints were incomplete, showing only the upper levels. The critical communications hub was somewhere in the subterranean levels, and we had no idea where. "The only way in is with the rat," Finn said during our final briefing in the SCIF. The air in the room was thick with tension and the hum of the white noise machine. The rat was short for Remote Access Transmitter. It wasn't a bug, it was a Trojan horse. Disguised as a standard-issue Iraqi military power strip, it was identical in every way, down to the manufacturer's stampings forged by a master artisan in Langley's workshop. But inside, it contained a suite of surveillance electronics. Once plugged in, it would automatically begin to map the entire facility's secure communications network, identify the central hub, and transmit the coordinates back to us in a single encrypted burst. It was a one-shot device. Once we handed it over, we lost all control. "How do we get it in?" Vance asked, steepling his fingers. "We can't just walk in and start replacing their power strips." "We don't," I said. I was looking at the personnel files for the bunker's senior command. "We give it to them as a gift." My plan was simple and insane. One of the senior communications officers at Taji, a Major Al-Tikriti, had a weakness for Western electronics. Our intelligence, culled from a source in Amman, said he was constantly complaining about the poor quality of his local equipment. The next day, Vance lodged a formal complaint about a power surge at a previous inspection site that had allegedly damaged some of our delicate equipment. He demanded, with theatrical pomposity, that all future inspection sites use UN-provided power conditioners to protect our gear. It was a brilliant piece of bureaucratic jujitsu. We weren't asking to modify their facility. We were demanding they protect our property. Tariq, of course, refused, Vance argued. For 2 days, they went back and forth, the argument escalating all the way to the UN leadership in New York and back. Finally, a compromise was reached, just as I knew it would be. We would be allowed to lend the facility a few of our own surge protectors for the duration of our inspection. When we arrived at the Taji bunker, the air was thick with tension. Soldiers with Kalashnikovs stood every 50 feet. We were escorted deep underground, through a series of heavy blast doors that closed behind us with a heavy, final thud that echoed in the concrete passages. Down here, the air was cold and recycled, smelling of ozone and floor polish. Major Altikriti was a thick-set man with a suspicious scowl and a lavish mustache. Tariq introduced us. I carried the case containing 3 power strips. 2 were completely normal. The third was the rat. As per the agreement, we will be utilizing our own power supply, Vance announced grandly. I placed one of the clean power strips on a table and began plugging in our equipment. Then, I approached the Major's own desk. His existing power strip was old, the beige plastic cracked. Several military radios and a secure telephone were plugged into it. "This one looks faulty," I said, my tone casual, pointing at the cracked plastic. "Might be the source of the power fluctuations we've been warned about." I unplugged his equipment. Before he could protest, I offered him the R8. "Here, use ours for the duration of our visit. It is much more reliable. Consider it a gift." His eyes lit up with a flash of naked greed. He saw a high-quality piece of Western kit, free for the taking. He nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. Tariq watched the entire exchange, his face like stone. He walked over, picked up the rat, and examined it. He turned it over and over in his hands. My heart stopped. My blood felt like ice in my veins. He checked the weight, the seams, the markings. It was a perfect copy. But a forensic examination would reveal its secrets. For a full 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, the fate of the entire operation and our lives rested in his hands. Finally, he placed it back on the desk. "It is acceptable," he said. But his eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw a profound, chilling certainty. He didn't have proof, but he was no longer guessing. He knew we were not what we seemed. He simply couldn't see the shape of the trap. We spent 4 hours inspecting meaningless storage bays, the charade playing out in agonizing slow motion. The whole time, I could feel the rat, just 100 feet away, plugged into the wall in the Major's office. It was working, silently mapping the network, searching for the hub, waiting to send its single, silent burst of information. The signal came just as we were packing to leave. My satellite phone, disguised as a UN-issue Motorola radio, vibrated silently in my pocket. A single, encrypted text message appeared on its tiny screen. A string of numbers, coordinates. We had it. The location of the Taji Command and Control Hub. It was in a sub-level, 3 floors directly beneath us. Our mission was complete. Operation Midas was a success. We were ordered to exfiltrate from Baghdad the next day. The mood in the SCIF that night should have been celebratory. We had accomplished the impossible. But I felt nothing but a cold, gnawing unease. Tariq's look haunted me. It wasn't the look of a man who had been defeated. It was the look of a man who had just confirmed a terrible suspicion. As we boarded the UN transport plane at Saddam International Airport, I saw him one last time. He was standing on the tarmac, watching our plane, a lone figure in a dark suit against the blinding glare of the sun. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just watched until we were airborne, and he was just a speck on the sun-scorched earth. Weeks later, back in the sterile comfort of Langley, the debriefings were endless. The data from the moths was pouring in. It was a fire hose of intelligence, an unprecedented, real-time look inside a closed regime. We were heroes. Vance was promoted to a senior position in the European division. Finn was given a top post at the Skunk Works, a blank check to invent new toys. I was offered a desk, a promotion, a quiet life managing other people's risks from behind a computer screen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Tariq's final look, the ease with which the Major accepted the rat. It felt too easy. Spies live and die by spotting the patterns that others miss. And the pattern here was wrong. I spent my nights digging, not through the intelligence we had gathered, but through the operational logs of our own mission. I used my old clearances, called in favors from data analysts who owed me. I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for the flaw, the loose thread, the single discordant note in our perfect symphony of deception. And then I found it. It was buried deep in the technical specifications of the rat, in a sub-menu of a diagnostic program that Finn himself had probably never even looked at, labeled simply echo_payload_secondary. The rat did more than just map the network. It had a secondary function, a dormant one. When activated by a specific, highly encrypted satellite signal, it wasn't a listener. It was a shouter. It was designed to emit a powerful looping electronic signal that perfectly mimicked the unique signature of a guidance system for a specific type of long-range scimitar missile. A missile that intelligence suggested Saddam was close to developing, but didn't actually possess. It wasn't a bug. It was a beacon. The blood drained from my face. My heart, which had remained steady in the face of the Mukhabarat, now hammered with a new kind of fear, a sickening, existential dread. We hadn't been sent to find the evidence of WMDs. We had been sent to plant it. The entire, elaborate, high-risk operation wasn't just about listening. It was about creating a justification, a casus belli, the Midas touch. Everything we touched turned to gold for the war planners. I remembered Tariq's smile, the amusement in his eyes on that first day. He hadn't been playing a game with us. He had been a spectator at his own country's execution. He knew his nation was being framed, but he was powerless to stop it. The rat he'd talked about, he wasn't talking about a rodent chewing a wire. He was talking about me. We were the rats, getting into everything, chewing through the foundations of a nation with our clever little lies and our brilliant technology. I looked out the window of my Virginia apartment, at the quiet, orderly streets of a country that believed in clean, justifiable wars fought for noble reasons. They didn't see the men in the shadows, the ones who laid the tripwires and baited the traps. We had handed them the perfect excuse. An active weapons guidance signal emanating from a high-level military command bunker that proved the existence of a weapon that didn't exist. It was a lie wrapped in a truth, broadcast by a ghost. And I was the one who had plugged it into the wall. The war that was coming would be built on many things: oil, politics, fear. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that its foundation would be laid with the quiet, electronic pulse of a gifted power strip, deep beneath the Iraqi sand. And no one would ever hear it but me.